And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jessica Kioski. I'm a speech language pathologist, and I've specialized in accents, dialects, and pronunciation training for 21 years. So this is what I've done my whole career. I'm also the creator of the Accent Channel method of speech improvement. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about materials. Specifically, what are the components that should be included in a really effective and really useful practice sheet for accent and pronunciation training? Now, I use practice sheets with my private students and also in my online courses. In my sessions, I spend about 10 to 15 minutes with my students working with practice sheets, and I also assign them as homework because it's the repetition practice with these sheets that give our students the permanent improvement that they're looking for. It's not always the most fun part of speech improvement because it is that repetition, but that's really what's going to help our students get that automatic and permanent improvement that they're looking for. But because all practice materials are not created equal, if you're designing your own sheets or if you're using someone else's practice sheets, whether that's for you to practice your own speech or to work with a student of your own, there are some things that you need to be sure are included in the practice materials that you're using. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. So the first thing that you want to look for in a speech improvement or pronunciation training or accent training practice sheet, is it appropriate for adults? And I see this all the time. I see teachers and speech pathologists who will grab child articulation sheets. So they'll grab word lists or other materials that were created for younger children. And these materials will have, childish pictures or, silly tongue twisters. And I'm not against tongue twisters, but when it's written in that childish, what's that font called? That Comic Sans, that like childish looking font. When you can tell that a sheet has been designed for a child, it's not going to work with accent training students. The students that I see are so intelligent, so sophisticated, and so worldly. And if you start a session and you give them a sheet that was designed to be used in an elementary school, it's not appropriate, it's not interesting, and people will sometimes be offended that you're insulting their intelligence. So number one thing to look out for, make sure your materials are adult appropriate. Second thing to watch for, does it cover as many contexts as possible? It's hard enough to get our students to practice every single day. Not just our students. It's hard enough to find time to, practice yoga or practice learning another language or whatever it is that you're trying to do. It's hard to find that time to carve out in a day, and our students are no different. So we want to include all the possible connections of sounds in our sheets. So by that I mean, if we're looking at a target sound, let's say we're working on final D, we want to make sure that our practice sheet for final D practices connecting that D to another D, connecting that D to a vowel, connecting that D to as many other consonants as possible. How do we connect that D to a glottal stop? How do we pronounce that D if it's the very last thing they say in a sentence versus connecting it to another word? There are different rules for all of these different situations, and you want to be sure that these are all covered in your practice materials. So definitely look out for context. Do your sheets cover as many contexts as possible? There's a good one. KTS. What is that? Context. KTS. Contexts as possible. Easier to connect to a vowel, harder to connect to a consonant. So I would want my students to work on both of those situations. Make sense? Okay, good. Does it cover a variety of spellings for the sound? So sounds and spellings in English are very confusing. I always use the example of the letter X. We've got the letter X, but there's no sound X in English. The letter X is pronounced X. So it's the vowel E, followed by the consonant K, followed by the consonant S, X. X, but there's no sound for the letter. And this can be really confusing. Our students see a letter visually and they need to know all the different possibilities of how to pronounce it. Sometimes a letter like C, sometimes the letter C is the K sound like in cookie. Sometimes the letter C is the S sound like in face. So the more we can expose our students to these different spellings of each sound, the more quickly they'll improve and the more confident they'll feel about pronouncing words. And that all starts with the practice sheet. All right, do your sheets contain common words? Again, our practice time for our students is probably limited. We want to make the most of their practice time. So why would we spend that limited practice time working on words that they're never going to use in a real conversation? Make sure that your materials contain common words that students will use in a typical day. And bonus points if you can tailor those common words to each specific student's lifestyle, career, daily activities, friends, family, hobbies. The more you can personalize your sessions, the better they will be, the more your students will want to keep coming back. So look out for common words. Make sure your materials encourage a variety of intonations. So to be a great speaker in English, you need to understand how to make a phrase sound like a question. You need to learn how to make a phrase sound like a statement or a command. Non-native speakers or ESL speakers aren't sure what's appropriate or how to do that. They don't always know how to make a question sound like a question. We go up in pitch at the end. That's how we ask a question, but that needs to be practiced to become an instinctive habit. So you want to practice that on paper before you practice it in a conversation. So make sure that your practice sheets encourage questions, statements, surprise, sarcasm, all these different music patterns that we use in our voice. They need to be practiced and explained to become a regular part of conversation. So those are the major things that you want to look out for. I've got a couple more if you're interested. I wrote a blog post about this subject and I'm going to post that below this video. If you have questions, you can also comment below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about practice materials. I design most of my own. There are a few materials that I use from other sources, but I design most of my own practice sheets. So if that's something that you're looking to do and you want a little guidance or advice, feel free to comment below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So thank you for watching. I hope this was useful and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.